Welcome to Religion Uncovered, where we dive headfirst into questions that faith sometimes hesitates to ask. Today's discussion is, really something. Why there are two Jesuses on trial according to the Gospel of Mark.
That's right. Two Jesuses. One, the well-known spiritual figure, and the other, a sort of militant rebel.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the setup. At Passover, according to Mark, Pilate offers to release one prisoner, and the crowd chooses Barabbas, who in some early manuscripts is not just Barabbas, but Jesus Barabbas. Yep, two different Jesuses on the docket.
And it's not just a quirky note, it's a loud theological statement. I mean, what's up with having like two messiahs in the same story?
It's like the text is intentionally creating a dualism. On one side, we've got Jesus called the Christ, the, compassionate parable-telling Savior. And on the other side, there's Jesus Barabbas, which means son of the Father, hinting at, a more militant, rebellious figure.
Yeah, exactly. So, in a way, the trial becomes a sort of theological showdown. One that asks, do you want a suffering servant or a revolutionary?
Precisely. And it's made even more striking by the Roman custom. At Passover, Pilate would offer to release one prisoner as a gesture. The crowd, probably influenced by the trembling hopes of rebellion, opts for Barabbas.
And isn't that like a powerful metaphor? I mean, the people literally choose the man who might challenge their status quo over the one who embodies suffering and sacrifice.
True, it's as if the narrative is saying that by opting for Barabbas, the crowd, and maybe by extension society, picks a kind of Messiah that diverges from what might have been the true path.
Yeah, it almost feels like an ironic twist, right? Exactly. And that's where Mark's work really shines. It's not just recording events, it's crafting a literary and theological counterattack. It almost seems like he's taking a stance against the prevailing messianic expectations of certain groups at the time, like the Jerusalem church, led by James, Peter, and John.
Right, and here's the interesting bit. While the Jerusalem church upheld a Jewish Messiah who was expected to restore an earthly kingdom and follow the Torah strictly, Paul came along preaching a cosmic visionary Christ who was revealed in visions after a resurrection.
Yeah, that's a bold contrast. And in this narrative, Mark is sort of, bridging or even challenging those differing views. By inserting the trial with the choice between Barabbas and Jesus called the Christ, he brings in that tension between militant nationalism and spiritual sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, on one hand, Barabbas suits those who long for a forceful, revolutionary deliverer, a sort of zealot Messiah with the potential for rebellion. And on the other hand, Jesus of Nazareth embodies the suffering servant who, despite being rejected, offers a more profound kind of salvation.
But here's something that puzzles me a bit. Why do you think this detail, the naming of Barabbas as Jesus, nearly vanished from the modern biblical texts?
That's a great question. Some scholars suggest that later communities might have deliberately omitted or downplayed the Jesus Barabbas reading to avoid confusing the identity of the true Jesus. It might also be a consequence of theological agendas. If you promote one clear Savior figure, you lessen the possibility of a competing interpretation from within. And Mark's text is already a counter-narrative against the Jerusalem church's messianic expectations.
Right. So, in a way, the elimination or marginalization of Jesus Barabbas in later manuscripts could reflect the effort to consolidate a singular, unified Christian identity.
Absolutely. Now think about the symbolism. Barabbas literally means son of the Father, and Christ means anointed one. These names are not just arbitrary. Each carries deep layers of meaning about what kind of Messiah these figures represent.
That's insightful. And if we follow that train of thought, isn't it interesting how the crowd's choice in this trial corresponds with, a kind of broader socio-political selection? It's almost as if they're opting for a political, even militaristic savior over a spiritual one.
Exactly, and that's where the allegory kicks in. Mark, writing in the aftermath of the 70 CE destruction of Jerusalem, might be critiquing the, misguided hope that a militant Messiah would save the people. Instead, he implies that true salvation comes from a Christ who suffers and is ultimately rejected by his people. It's as if Mark's narrative warns, look, the rejection of the suffering servant will lead to destruction. And that choice, as shown in the trial, is not a neutral one. It has profound consequences.
Yes, and that ties into the broader scriptural references too. We have echoes of apocalyptic imagery from Numbers, Daniel, and even Revelation that frame the expectations of a messianic deliverer. But Mark flips those expectations. Instead of a triumphant conqueror with a rod of iron, we get a crucified savior.
Right? It's such a stark contrast. And it reminds me of the warnings Paul gives in Galatians. You know, he's really concerned about anyone preaching another Jesus or a different gospel.
Yeah, Paul's vision of Jesus is totally different. His Jesus isn't Barabbas. He isn't about earthly rebellion. He's about a cosmic redemptive figure who appears after his resurrection and awaits a future return to reconcile the Gentiles with, well, a new order of salvation.
True, and here's where I kind of want to challenge that view a bit. While Paul's writings are compelling, some scholars like Richard Carrier and Burton Mack argue that the narrative in Mark is trying to, preserve an alternative perspective, a sort of middle ground between these divergent messianic visions.
Oh, that's an interesting twist. Yeah, exactly. So, while Paul might insist on one true interpretation, Mark's text leaves room for debate. It raises the question, did the earliest followers really intend to meld these two visions, or was there an inherent conflict between them?
That's the beauty of it, really. It forces us to ask, do we choose the sword-wielding, rebellious Savior, or do we lean into the idea of a crucified, suffering Redeemer who embodies ultimate sacrifice?
And it's not just a theoretical debate, it reflects the very real historical tensions between different Jewish groups and the emerging Christian identity in a post-temple world.
Exactly. It's a literary and theological battlefield. Mark's narrative, with its dual Jesuses, serves as a critique of any simplistic, one-dimensional messianic expectation.
Right, absolutely.
And, the choice made by the crowd as depicted in Mark ultimately becomes a symbolic indictment. They choose Barabbas, the militant figure, suggesting that rejecting the suffering messenger leads to, well, inevitable judgment.
In many ways, it's like a warning that the consequences of that choice echo through history, shaping outcomes far beyond a single trial.
Yeah, and think about how Mark ties this in with apocalyptic visions from texts like Daniel and Numbers. It's like he's interweaving broader messianic prophecies with the immediate political drama of his time.
Yes, it's a layered narrative for sure. But here's a question. Do you think Mark intended his audience to literally see Barabbas as the wrong choice? Or was it more of a metaphor for the kind of salvation the community should aspire to?
I like that question. I believe it's both. A literal historical moment intertwined with a symbolic lesson. Mark isn't just retelling events. He's prompting his listeners to reflect on what kind of Messiah they truly desire.
Exactly.
And that reflection, in turn, forces readers to, reassess the whole meaning of salvation, leadership, and even community identity in the aftermath of historical traumas like the temple's destruction.
Absolutely. It's as if Mark's narrative is urging his audience to think critically about where they place their hope, on brute force rebellion or on the transformative power of sacrificial love.
Yes, and this duality isn't just academic, it's a call to decision. It begs the question, which Jesus do you embrace as the real Savior? And that debate, as messy as it might be, has shaped Christian thought for centuries.
No doubt about that. And honestly, that open-ended challenge is what keeps the conversation alive even today. It's not a question with a neat answer. It's a dialogue that continues to evolve, sort of like, our own understanding of faith and history.
Precisely. And by examining this overlooked moment, we not only understand the complexities of early Christian narratives, but also see how literature and theology intertwine to direct the faith of communities.
Right on. So, at the end of the day, the two Jesuses serve as a mirror reflecting our own complex choices between radical change and humble sacrifice. That's, the ongoing story. Thanks for joining in this discussion. It really opens up, the heart of the debate behind our spiritual legacy.